I could explain how a game featuring a playable school shooting would be very reasonably upsetting to people in a country where school shootings keep happening, but no, people do need that explained to them these days, don't they? Well anyway, keep owning the libs, folks. I hope the long-term collateral damage is worth it.
You know, I take a portion of what I said back. I said I wasn't offended by the game, and in truth, I am a bit, because I'm offended by really stupid, short-sighted, reckless business moves, and that's what this is. And I know some people will say, but Jim.
I like that, but.
Are you saying we should run scared? Are you saying we should kowtow to the critics? Are you saying we should run with our tail between our legs? Yeah, sometimes.
You went full retard, man. Never go full retard.
Oh dear, Jim. What have you done? Now, before we begin, I want to make this perfectly clear. I do not hate Jim Sterling, and I do not want you to go harass Jim Sterling. There are some things that me and him agree on, and I do think he's a good YouTuber, and there are things that I think he is right about, such as the many issues within the AAA game industry, the issue of microtransactions and loot boxes, and his many rants on Bethesda going full retard, which maybe I'll talk about someday, and Fallout 76. However, there are times where Jim Sterling does say something stupid or that I disagree with, and there are times where he goes full retard, and as we all know, you never go full retard. Now, as you saw in the clip just now, that Jim Sterling is suggesting that we should cuck to politicians and critics because sometimes there are games that come out that are so distasteful and offensive that politicians could possibly get involved and make things harder for the video game industry by making more restrictions and legislations and putting useless systems like the ESRB in place, which you and I both know is a fucking punchline at this point. The ESRB is fucking worthless, and I know that you know this, Jim, because you and others have made videos on how much of a joke the ESRB is. They will rate a game like Pokemon much higher for having fake gambling in it where you don't even spend real money, but then they'll rate a game like NBA 2K20 rated E for everyone when it has actual literal gambling in it. I can make a whole video alone on why the ESRB is a fucking joke. And I find it interesting, Jim, that you say that oh, a game about playing as a school shooter is going too far and is stupid because there are a lot of school shootings in America. Are you serious, Jim? Because if you want to play this game, I could play this game, Jim. So I could easily say that Spec Ops: The Line is a horrible game and a terrible business decision because it makes light of actual war crimes and war atrocities that happen out there in the world and the people that suffer at the hands of war. Do you want to get rid of Spec Ops: The Line, Jim Sterling? How about GTA? It can bring to light many real-life people that suffer at the hands of actual criminals. You want to get rid of GTA while you're at it, Jim? Now, I understand that Jim is not necessarily saying these games should be banned, but he might as well be suggesting that because he's saying that games like this shouldn't exist because it might offend the wrong people. Listen, Jim, you should know that politicians are scumbags and are always gonna find ways to scapegoat video games. They've been scapegoating video games and blaming it on violence for decades, Jim. You should fucking know that when a politician speaks about video games, it is a joke because politicians are out of touch. They don't understand jack shit of what goes on in the real world, let alone the video game industry. And the idea that we should just tuck our tail between our legs and run away because some politician might get offended that, oh my god, there's a game about a school shooter, we need to lose our fucking shit, Jim. And no, just because there's a lot of school shootings, Jim, doesn't mean that, oh my god, a game about a mass shooter is unacceptable. Now, is making a game where you play as a mass shooter tasteful or politically correct? No. However, people have a right to artistic expression. People have the right to make video games or media in general about whatever the fuck they want. Now, am I gonna sit here and say that Hatred is a good game? No. However, what you have to understand, Jim, is it's because of the moral outrage and the media losing their shit over a game like Hatred that was the very thing that made it so successful and drove it to the top of the Steam charts because, Jim, people don't like being told what they can and cannot play. People don't like to be talked down to by politicians and video game critics that think they know better than us. Okay? People can't stand that, Jim. And if you're gonna say that a game about a mass shooter is unacceptable, then a game about war should be unacceptable, Jim. So I guess Spec Ops: The Line is also a bad business decision, as you put it, Jim, and it's fucking ridiculous. And I somewhat sympathize with you, Jim, when it comes to idiots out there that say that we need a game like Active Shooter to exist just to piss off people on the left. I do agree with you that that is stupid to want to support a game simply to piss off your political opposition. However, Jim, while you are technically correct that it is oftentimes people in the Republican or conservative side of the spectrum that often call for video games to be banned or blame it on real-life violence, you cannot ignore, Jim, the people on the left that like to accuse video games of being sexist or homophobic or whatever bullshit idiots on the far left can pull out of their ass and blame on video games. I know damn well, Jim, that you are aware of the existence of people like Anita Sarkeesian. Don't pretend that people like that don't fucking exist and don't have influence in the fucking video game industry, Jim. And I find it a little bit offensive that you say that we need to cuck to politicians like that. No, Jim, if anything, that's a reason why politicians need to stay the fuck out of the video game industry, because they don't know what the fuck they are doing, and I guarantee you that their influence or regulations in the video game industry is making things worse, not better. For example, the ESRB is fucking worthless, and we have people that work at large corporations like EA that have influence within the ESRB and can pull strings behind the scenes. That's kind of how this works, Jim. One thing I really can't stand, Jim, is whenever you trash capitalism. It's fucking ridiculous. Because, Jim, a lot of the problems you cite in the video game industry are not the fault of capitalism, it is the fault of fucking corporatism. It is the fault of fucking corporations that lobby governments to rewrite regulations that they create to try to stop these corporations from doing things in their fucking favor. You can't trust politicians, Jim. And I can promise you, Jim, that if we truly lived in a free market, a lot of these problems wouldn't exist because the people would regulate the market. and these companies would have to be under the restrictions of capitalism, meaning that you have to provide a product or service that the people want, not what executives want, at a quality and price better than that of your competitor, or else you're fucked. Because the reason why capitalism works is because it holds companies accountable, and due to cutthroat competition, makes it borderline impossible to hold any kind of monopoly like what we see happening today. A company like Electronic Arts would not be allowed to exist. They would not last under a free market, because with how many times people have gotten pissed off at EA's shit and have made their stocks drop, I promise you and assure you they would go bankrupt under a free market. But of course, you want to blame this problem on capitalism because it's somehow capitalism's fault. However, Jim, I don't even believe you understand fully what capitalism is, because you can't seem to understand the difference between a company and a corporation. There is a large difference between capitalism and corporatism, Jim. And I wish that you would understand that and stop blaming problems on capitalism and point your fingers at the right issue. Corporatism, politicians, large corporations with deep pockets that can lobby the government to get their way. And as I said earlier, people have the right to make video games about whatever they want. I find it funny that you bitch about active shooter, yet when the government has the military make a game called School Shooter Simulator, which is a VR thing, I might add, that you don't mention, and I'm sure you would be perfectly okay with that, because if a politician does something, it must be for the right reasons. Now, sure, they say the reason they created this was to train teachers to know what to do in a mass shooter situation. However, Jim, what I would say to you is, if it's not okay for people in the video game industry to make a game about a mass shooter or a school shooter, then it should also not be okay for the government to do the same thing. Because guess what, Jim? That's called double standards. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying either one should not be allowed to do so. Like I said, people should be allowed to make video games for whatever reason they want. You don't always have to agree with it, Jim. However, we should not have to bow down to fucking politicians and critics that think they know better than us. Who gives a shit if they get offended? Who the fuck cares, okay? There are a lot of violent or politically incorrect games out there, Jim. Hatred, Manhunt, GTA, Carmageddon. I can go on and on. These games do have a right to exist. People have a right to artistic freedom, okay? Your rights don't end where your neighbor's feelings begin, okay? You don't get to sit here and say that, oh my god, because someone made a school shooter game on Steam, that means it's going to fuck up the entire game industry because some politician out there might get offended. Who gives a shit? If anything, that's a reason why politicians need to shut their fucking mouth, because we have idiots out there like Donald Trump trying to blame actual fucking violence on video games, even though there are studies out there that video games do not make people more violent. If anything, it makes them less violent because it gives them an outlet to live out power fantasies that they otherwise would never commit in real life, because there would be real life consequences, Jim. And I say, if someone out there wants to play a game to live out their power fantasy of playing as a mass shooter, a school shooter, a marine committing war atrocities, or whatever the fuck they want, they should have the freedom to do so, as long as no one is being hurt, Jim. What is the fucking problem? I am so sick and tired of this era of political correctness. And again, just because there are a lot of mass shootings, Jim, doesn't mean that that magically makes a game like Active Shooter or Hatred unacceptable. Again, to that same token, there are a lot of wars out there in the world, Jim. Does that mean that games like Call of Duty and Spec Ops and Medal of Honor don't have the right to exist just because there's a lot of people who are suffering in wars right now? No, it is fiction, Jim. The only people that get offended by shit like this are people that can't tell the difference between reality and fiction, and most normal people can tell the difference, Jim. And I really hope that you don't ever try to speak about this again, Jim, because I cringe what you would have to say in regards to school shootings. You know what's actually irresponsible, Jim? The fucking FBI redefining what the fuck a mass or school shooting is to intentionally inflate the statistics so politicians can have justification for pushing regulations and fucking laws to restrict people's God-given rights, Jim. That is what is fucking unacceptable, Jim. Not making a stupid fucking video game, Jim. And the fact that you are so short-sighted that you did not even think of this infuriates me to no fucking end, okay? What the FBI and what politicians do are far more unacceptable. I have made videos in the past of how the FBI or governments have redefined the term school or mass shooting. For example, if you injure 4 or more people, that's a mass shooting to them. Okay? There was one time they labeled someone committing suicide in the parking lot of a abandoned school that no longer was in service as a school shooting. Okay? They will inflate the statistics so they can push propaganda so they can get more power, Jim. Understand this, Jim. Politicians only get involved in things when there is power to be gained. They don't give a shit about morality, Jim. They don't give a shit about any kind of fucking industry. They only care if they can twist it in a way to gain more fucking power. And that is what is truly irresponsible, Jim. Like I said, while I share your frustrations with morons that say we need games like this to piss off their political opposition, you are not right in saying that games like Active Shooter existing on Steam somehow means that things are going to get worse for the game industry. What is going to make things worse for the game industry is allowing things to be set up in place to where large corporations like EA can continue to lobby the government and politicians continuously allowing for there to be regulations to restrict the video game industry. The government should not be regulating the fucking video game market, point blank period. And while we're at it, Jim, what the fuck is this shit all about?
Some people will go on the internet to express their outrage, to express their fury, to express their disgust that the Battlefield 5 cover has a lady on it, because it's disrespectful to the millions of people who lost their lives in World War II, you see.
No, Jim. People are not offended and outraged because there's a woman on the cover of Battlefield. It's because it's historically inaccurate. People don't like it when you make war games that are supposed to take place in a historical time period and you do whatever the fuck you want with it. because it's historically inaccurate, and it takes you out of the experience. Some people like to play games that are historically accurate, and they want that experience of a traditional historical game about World War II, not a bunch of bullshit that people pull out of their ass. It's more so because people are sick and tired of people forcing in representation or so-called diversity to fit some kind of political message or something like that. People are sick and tired of that. People don't fucking care. They just want to play a fucking video game. That's what people are annoyed about, Jim. Okay, imagine if I were playing a game that is supposed to be realistic and historically accurate about, I don't know, Africa or something, and then the game is filled with mostly white people. That would obviously take you out of the experience, because logically, if you set a game in Africa, most of the people that are going to be represented in the game are going to be African people. It's common fucking sense, Jim, and it would just take you right out of it. What if someone made a game where it was supposed to be historically accurate about the feudal Japan era, and there was just a complete potluck of all the different races all over the world in feudal Japan just for the sake of diversity? It would take you out of the experience, because you're playing that game because you want that experience of playing a game set in the feudal Japan era, not a game where you're in a melting pot. Now, if you want to just do whatever the fuck you want, that's fine. Don't try to have your game be historically accurate, or don't say like, oh, we want to have games that are accurate to history. Just make a game with whatever the fuck you want, and don't actually try to just force in diversity where it's not needed. It's just annoying. And no, I'm not saying this because, oh my god, own the libs or the SJWs or ma right wing. I don't really give a shit. I'm not left or right. I don't fucking care. I'm a freaking anarchist. However, Jim, I do think it's a little bit disgusting of you to misrepresent people's arguments about why they were annoyed about what went down with Battlefield 5. Now, you can say it's stupid all you want, Jim. I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with, Jim, is with you misrepresenting what people say. So, yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about that. Jim Sterling, just please, I'm sure you probably didn't intend to come off as a complete retard, but please don't let this happen again, Jim. I know you're not 100% stupid, at least I hope you're not, and that you do seem to mean well in a lot of your videos. However, please, let's not let this happen again. Whenever you make a video about capitalism and misrepresent it, I fucking cringe. Whenever you make videos saying that we need to tuck our tail between our legs and not support something, or just say that something doesn't have a right to exist because some fuckwit politician or critic somewhere might get offended, especially in this overly sensitive PC generation, I get fucking irritated at that. Okay? Again, artistic freedom, Jim. Do you understand it? So let me know what you guys think. Do you think that Jim Sterling has gone full retard? Or do you think that he is right and that games like Active Shooter shouldn't exist because they actually do have a detrimental, long-term, damaging effect on the industry at large? Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys around next time.